So, hey everyone, I am Espen and I work on the Sanity Studio team. We had a meetup not too long ago where we showed off sort of the starting point for V3 and introduced the developer preview. And today I'll be speaking a little bit about custom input components in V3 specifically. So just to get everyone on the same page, input components are these ways of actually getting content into a field inside of Sanity. So they can be things like an image input, which lets you upload an image. It can be a portable text editor, which allows you to embed rich text and other content types. Or it can be a code block, or it can just be a string field like a title for an article. All kinds of stuff. There's very little limitations, and you can customize these, which is what makes Sanity kind of special, because you can make these super, super custom. So just briefly, the anatomy of an input component, there's a lot of things going on here, which you might not think about usually. So there's the field title and the description. There is validation errors and warnings. There are field presence, which shows who's currently in that field or has that field focused. There is a change indicator, which shows whether or not a field has changed since it was last published. And then sort of the two different segments of this is that you have a field, which encompasses all of this. And then you have the input, which is just the actual green area here, which is the actual sort of input that you enter things into. And that's the distinction that we didn't have in Sanity V2 that we now have in V3, which makes some of these things a little bit easier. Because what you usually care about is customizing just that sort of input area. So with V3, our goal was to improve the developer experience of these by simplifying some common scenarios, like leaving the input component as is, but sort of decorate or provide additional functionality around it, or to customize basically only the input and not the field, like the label and description. We also wanted to make sure that you have less code to write and maintained, and that we have a typed and documented API. And of course, just basically iterating on the APIs and making them simpler. And there's still improvements to be made here. So what I'll be showing today is sort of a first stepping stone, and then we'll work over time to make it even easier for you. Anyway, I'm going to show a bunch of code, and I'm not super brave. So I have prepared a little bit ahead of time, and I will go through it a little bit step by step instead of trying to live code it all. So on the left here, you can see a default Sanity Studio setup in V3. And on the right, you will see the actual Sanity Studio running in the browser for that. So this is just the movie database template that you can choose when you're initializing a project. And as you can see, I have chosen to use TypeScript for this project, which will allow me to get a little bit more help when I'm configuring and building these things. So first off, this is, as I said, just a plain old thing. You can see it's loaded the desk tool. I have a movie type that's being shown here. The schemas are looking very much just like what it did in version 2 of the studio. And today I want to take you through the process of creating an input component and showing you a little bit of about what's possible. There are sort of two different approaches to it. I'm going to go to the next step here, which you can see here that I have implemented a custom input component for the portable text field. But at this time, it's just showing some text. So I'm going to show you how that's done. So in the movie type here, you can specify which components to use for a particular field. This used to be, I believe it used to be component or input component as a property here, but we've now moved this so that it's a component, and then it takes an input or a field or a preview and a couple of different things of that sort. And that's the easiest way to go about it. And so in this particular case, I have called this input JSON view, which is not very doesn't really show you what it's actually doing right now, because now it's just showing you some text. But as you can see, I've just placed this in a plugins and JSON view folder. There is no, there's nothing that says where you want or need to place these things in Sanity v3. You can place them anywhere you want. I've just decided to do it here because why not? And so, as you can see, I'm importing some components from Sanity UI and just rendering that just to get sort of React running on the screen. Yeah, so that's step one. Let's take a little step further. Now I'm using the code component from Sanity UI, and I'm rendering the actual JSON, which now makes a little bit more sense why it's called JSON view, right? So what I want to show here is that, first of all, we've added a type for the props that's coming in here. So that's TypeScript providing that. And then the nice thing about that is that I can now do things like props, and I can see what all the different available options to me are on this level, which is really helpful when you're exploring Sanity and trying to figure out how it all ties together and what your options are. So in this case, I'm just stringifying the value. Like the value is an array in this case of objects, and I'm just putting that on the screen using Sanity UI. That's not super helpful, of course. First of all, it's not a actual input. So I'll be going a little bit deeper on this over the course of this demo, and then I'll show you how to actually make it into an input at some point. Don't worry. But I wanted to show just how easy it is to actually do stuff now with Sanity UI and the new v3 APIs. It's kind of fun to explore. So if we go to the next step here, oops. You can see that I have replaced the input props with a more specific type. So as you saw, I was implementing this for the specific like portable text field, and because I know it's going to be a portable text field, I can now instead say that the properties are going to be a portable text props, which will just make it a slightly more understandable for the editor what options are available. I've also added a switch here so that it's not always JSON. I can switch back and forth between that. It's just using React setState hook and just toggling between those. And a bit more like Sanity UI code here to actually render that to the right here. And it's just like toggling it. It's pretty standard stuff. And a conditional thing. And then I'm importing the portable text input from Sanity form and rendering it on screen. So this is already like kind of helpful for a developer, just as an additional feature, not necessarily as like something that is going to revolutionize your sort of editing experience, but it's kind of fun and helpful as a developer. Like you can, of course, use our inspect feature, but this is going to give you all the fields, and it's sometimes a little bit hard to sort of, which field is it? Oh yeah, it's the overview field, and navigate this thing. So I feel like this is pretty nice. So I want to take this one step further and use some of the new stuff that's available in v3. So for this project, I have a few available roles defined So that's a feature that's available if you have some plan, some pricing plan. I'm not sure if it's our business plan or enterprise or something else. So I've actually defined a specific role which is called developer, but you have access to other roles, just by default, like the edit role or editor role. And so what I'm doing here is I'm getting the current user using the use current user hook. That's going to provide me either with a current user or null. It will be null in the case where it's loading. No, actually it won't. It's if you're anonymous. If for some reason you're embedding this into a context where you're currently not logged in, or you don't have a user. And so I have the user, and that user has some roles, and then I'm going through those and looking for a role that is developer. So if I am a developer, then I'm going to show this toggle. And if not, then I'm just going to render the input as usual. And just to prove that this actually works, I can change that from developer to like dog. If my role is a dog, then I'm going to render it. And as you can see, it's no longer there. And you can also see the super fast reloading that's powering V3 now with Vite, which is running under the hood. So that's super nice as well, because it's just super nice to develop on. That's helpful. This sort of helps us because we can now put this into production and not have to worry about people who don't know what JSON is sort of toggling this and being confused by it. So I want to take this even further. I've now sort of removed it from the scheme. I've no longer exported the JSON view the component, and I've removed it from the schema here, so it's no longer saying that it should be rendering this input component. Instead, I want to build a plugin, and that's sort of I want to make this into a generic thing that you can ship to other users or other projects that you're using. And it also allows me to do a little bit more because it has a bigger sort of surface area of customizability. So I've defined a plugin. I've used the create plugin API that's available in Sanity. And you can see I've given it a name called JSON view. So basically, this is doing nothing at the moment. And I've added it to the plugins array here, JSON view there. And what this now lets me do is a bunch of things. So if I open the autocomplete here, you can see that TypeScript is providing me with all of the available options here. And I'm going to be using one of these in particular. If I go to the next step of this. I'm implementing a thing called render input. And what this is doing is basically telling Sanity how it should be rendering input fields. And one thing of note here is that even a document is an input, which might be a little bit confusing. But if I remove this check here, then you can see that the whole thing will just be rendering input. So what I can do is explicitly check whether or not the schema type that is being rendered for this input is a document type. You can see that I'm doing schema type.type here, which is kind of confusing. That just means that the schema type is, for instance, movie. So if I check schema type.name, that will be movie. So I need to actually go one step up and see what the parent type of that document is. Which is going to be document. We're going to be providing some cool little like helper functions for a bunch of these things at some point, like is document type, but that's currently not available. So what I'm doing here is basically saying if it's a document, then I want to just like do the default thing. So as you can see, it's getting props, which are the inputs, the the properties that the input gets, and then you get a next function, which is kind of similar to a middleware in something like Express.js. So you can call next with props, and then it'll just do the default thing. So now you can see that every field here is then just rendering this thing. So one step further. Now I've adjusted this JSON view sort of function to be agnostic. So it doesn't just work for input or like portable text inputs. It's usable for any input type. And I've also extended it so the properties here take the regular input props, and it's also going to take children, like React children, as you might be familiar with, just like React components can take children. And I'm now passing down sort of the default here. So as I said, the next function, if you call it, is just going to render the default input. So I'm saying I want to render the instead of rendering like the portable text input as I did previously, I'm just going to render whatever it is that is the default. So that allows me to do this thing where I don't have to go into the schema and define like an input component for every single field that I want this on. I can just plop this in, and you can see that it works on any type. So if it's a string, it'll just show it as like JSON as a stringified thing. It works on the object level, or it can work even on like sub fields for that document. So that's pretty cool. And but I want to take it even further. This is a bit noisy with all of these like switches everywhere. So I can do things like I can use the isObjectSchemaType function, which is also exported from Sanity, to check that if it's a object type, then I don't want to render the JSON input, and that that means that I don't get these like double toggles here, for instance. That's one thing you could do. Makes it a little bit more readable. But you can also do things like one of the things that I really wanted to do was to be able to just sort of hover over a field and then be able to toggle it with a keyboard shortcut. So I don't have to go all the way over here and do that. So just to get some fundamentals up and running here, I've wrapped the input with some on-mouse over and on-mouse out functions. I'm sure there's better ways of doing this, of course. This is more like quick and dirty demo code. But as you can see, I've just hooked it up to the switch just to show that it actually works. So when I hover a field, you can see the switch actually changing. And that's the first step that I need, because I want to know if my mouse is like over that field. And given our last talk, this isn't very accessible because it's just using the mouse, which isn't great, but it's a first step. So now I'm going to add some shortcut listeners. So I want to be able to click or press Control-I or Meta-I on Mac to be able to inspect. So I've added this key down listener, which is going to check whether or not I'm hovering that field. And I'm going to check if I'm pressing the Control or Meta key at the same time as I'm pressing the I key. And if that happens, then I'm going to be toggling the show JSON, and I'm adding this using a use effect. So I'm listening to the entire window here for that key press. And then when it's this component is unmounted, then I'm removing that event listener. There's better ways of doing this as well, because now it's going to be adding like a whole bunch of event listeners instead of just one, but it'll work, and it's just a fun little demo. So when I now press that keyboard shortcut, you can see that it actually toggles between these states. And that's pretty nice. And that already provides me with some value, I feel like. Makes my life a little bit easier. And I could even do things like now check, I can even remove this toggle altogether if I wanted to and just have the keyboard shortcuts, but that is not very accessible. Like the good thing is that I can now at least tab through these and toggle with my keyboard. The next step here is allowing the keyboard shortcut even for non-developers. So this is something that I've been wanting to have, because sometimes when you want to help someone out and they're not a developer, it can be kind of annoying when you're looking over their shoulder and trying to understand why a document is not giving you the result that it is that you're expecting. It would be nice to be able to sort of inspect the JSON. But if they're not a developer, then you don't have that feature. That's the way it's coded right now, at least. But what I'm doing now is that I'm checking if the user is a developer or I'm showing the JSON. Then I'm going to do this thing. So if I change this to like some other thing where that's not going to trigger, then I'm not now saying I'm not a developer. But I can still use that keyboard shortcut to toggle. That's pretty cool. And if I take it one step further, it's very noisy with all of these switches. So I might just want like one big switch on the top of the document. So I'm going to show you a few things that allows you to do that. So first of all, I've wrapped the entire document in this new component called Document with JSON View Control. And again, this is just React. So I'm checking if it's a document type, and then I'm rendering that. I've sort of moved most of the logic up here to that sort of component. And then what I'm doing is when I'm rendering the children of that document, which is all of these fields, I'm going to wrap that in a new context provider. So some of you might be familiar with React Context, but it's basically an API that allows you to sort of wrap an entire subtree inside of React and get that value, the value of that context from anywhere in that tree. So I'm just going to give it a default value of false, like that JSON view context is basically just whether or not to show JSON. And then I'm going to say, yeah, the value is show JSON. So that when I toggle this, it's going to switch the entire context value. And then all of the other inputs are going to be wrapped in just this logic here. So I'm getting the context from using the use context, and that value will be whether or not to show it. And if we're showing it, then I'm rendering the JSON, and if not, then I'm just rendering the input. And this creates like a pretty readable and easy to understand thing. I can see that for some reason, oh, this is because this is a object type. That's interesting. So we could improve the switch probably, but because it's an object type, it's not rendering the value right now. There we go. Now it does the same for that. So what we could do is things like if it's an object type and the props.level is 1, I think, or it might be 0. So if we now switch, yeah. Oh, so level is 0 maybe? Ah. Probably shouldn't live code. This is the reason why you don't do live coding. So what is the keyboard shortcut? There we go. Yeah, there we go. So if the level is 0, so basically if it's a root level field, then I don't want to show it, or don't want to use it. Anyway, that's that. I want to take it one step further because I can always take it further, right? And I've got to update my notes here, but basically I'm now showing, am I showing? Oh, I've removed that entire component. Oh, right, I wanted to show an actual input, I'm sorry. was thrown together at the last minute, so I'm sorry for the sort of rant here. So what I'm done now is I'm going back to just to show you that you can actually make inputs as well. You can make changes to things. That's kind of a key feature, obviously. I've created a new plugin here called More Cocos. Cocos is my dog, which I love dearly. And then what that's going to do is it's going to render this text field here. But it's also going to give me a More Cocos button. So if you take a look at and when you click that button, it's just going to insert some love for Cocos, because we all need that in our lives, and it's also going to count how many hearts you have given Cocos. So to see how that works, I have an input here. Let me hide that. Which takes a string input props. So we know that it is a string, but the value of that can be undefined because if you don't have any content in this field, then it will be removed from that document altogether. So we're defaulting it to just an empty string just to make it easier to render. So it's basically just rendering the default component here by using again, we're passing down like the default input. And we're saying that we also want a button with an icon that has More Cocos in it. And when you click it, it should be calling this function. And you can see here that we've simplified the API for this change. Well, if you're familiar with the API of the input components from V2, it's slightly easier now. You have these, still have these set and unset and insert operations available. We might simplify this even further in the future, but this is what it's like right now. So I'm just saying I want to set this field to the value plus Cocos. And then I want to render this text underneath. So that's just a super basic example. I could probably make a lot more, I guess, non-trivial examples of how to use input components. But I'm going to show you like the full scale version of that, I guess you could call it. So going back to the JSON view example, like if we wanted to make like a super custom thing, then we could add an option to this plugin, which allows you to edit. So if you take a look at the JSON view plugin here, I now am providing it with options, which is of type JSON view options or void, which means you can choose to not pass it at all. And this options takes an allow editing boolean. So if I go back to the, not schemas, but the config, then you can see I'm now passing it options here. So this is a change from V2 where all the configuration was in like a config folder. Now you can just do this in TypeScript or JavaScript, which allows you to do lots of things, like use environment variables or anything you might want. So basically that's the first step, and then I'm also using a text area instead of code if the allow editing option is true. So when I'm doing this, you can see that these are now just like text areas. That's not actually hooked up anywhere. It's just basically rendering a text area. And I'm saying just style it as a monospace thing because it's code, which is not doing anything. So let's take that to the next level and actually implement some editing. So what we need for that is to be able to have sort of a separate edit state, because you need to be able to write into the JSON like this field without without it being valid JSON, I guess. You should be able to like just write stuff, and if it's valid JSON, then we want to actually send a patch to change it. This is not something that I recommend doing, and it's very scary and dangerous because you can do things that are not compatible with the schema at all. But there are cases where it would be nice to be able to just edit the JSON in the studio manually. So basically what I'm doing is I've hooked up a change handler to that text area, and I'm saying I want to get the value of it. So then I want to set that value to a new like state called edit state. That's just using like React. And then I'm checking if that value is empty. And if it's empty, then I'm just unsetting the entire field. So instead of having like an empty string or anything of that sort, I'm just going to remove the entire field if it's empty. And then I want to try to parse the value if it has content as JSON. And then I can just quickly show that. It's basically just calling JSON parse. And if it's an error, then I want to, instead of throwing, I just want to provide a like static constant called invalid value to be able to pick that up more easily. So if it's a valid value, then I am firing off a set for the entire field with the parsed value of that thing. So I can show you that that actually works now, but with oops. If I have a new tab or a window, I've got two editing sessions here, and one of them is JSON and one of them is not using JSON. So I want to edit this text here, wall E. So I can edit this, and you can see that the editor on the left is reflecting these changes. It's a little bit slow because it actually sends these patches to the server and then distributes that to all the clients. So it's not like local. But as you can see, it actually works. It is sending and editing JSON. Great. Oops. I think that's pretty cool. We can take it even further. We can add, this is the last thing, I promise you. If we want to take it really further, we can actually add something like Code Mirror, which allows you to have like a more proper editing experience within the studio for JSON. So again, I can change the text here, Wally. And then if I go back, or I can even change the title, you can see it reflect in real time. So that's all I wanted to show today. It's a very contrived example that's using JSON, which you probably maybe don't want to do, but I'll probably make some more demos with real world examples in the future. And I hope that was somewhat helpful. Thanks.
Very helpful, very cool. And I love we can take it a step further, and you just kept adding more and more to it. It's cool how far you can take that.
Yeah, it is. It's been a lot of fun to play around with, and it's just crazy the options that you have available now.
Yeah, there were a couple questions. So I think it was Hida that asked us at the very beginning, but you mentioned you chose TypeScript for this component. Why did you use TypeScript instead of JavaScript?
Right. So first of all, I just like TypeScript now. I hated it in the beginning, but once you get used to it, it is kind of nice just to have more. The editor sort of gives you a lot more help when you're doing things that you don't want to do. And when you're exploring someone else's API, I imagine it can be very helpful that it's giving you like, you can't pass that value to that thing because it's not what you expect it to be.
Yeah.
But it also gives a slightly better editor integration, even though you can use JavaScript and import, and it'll probably give you the same amount, like almost the same amount of help with what's available at the very least.
That makes sense. Do you know when V3 is going to be launched? I know it's in developer preview right now, but do you have an idea?
I don't want to promise anything,
Yeah.
but probably a few months, a few more months.
Okay.
We're still gathering feedback, so that's yeah. Please give it a try and give us all the feedback that you can, because it always helps, and we're trying to simplify things as much as possible. So we appreciate any feedback, even if it's been a bit of a month with a lot of vacation days, so we haven't been as responsive as we would have wanted to, but we promise it'll get better.
Yeah, speaking of feedback, I actually put in the GitHub discussions link into the Meetup channel. So if you have feedback or want to talk to us about V3, head there. And yeah, thanks for doing this last minute. That was a lot of info. And I really liked the JSON editing the JSON in the studio.
Yeah. It's useful sometimes, for sure.
Yeah. Right on. Well, thank you so much, Espen. And if any of you have questions for Espen after this, you can always find him in the Slack community.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you so much, and we will see you around.
Thank you. See ya.